age for WhatsApp users in the UK from 16 to 13. A BBC investigation has found that children as young as 10 are being added to groups on the messaging app that contain sexual images, violent content and racist language. Our correspondent Louisa Pilbeam has more details.
The NSPCC is among those to express concern at the new lower age limit, warning Meta had made the change before ensuring effective protections were in place for young users. The charity also said it was extremely concerning that children were being added to inappropriate WhatsApp groups where strangers could contact them. The BBC has seen screenshots of one group with more than 900 members, including children, that contained sexual images and racist messages. Meta, which also owns Facebook, says all users are given options to control who can add them to groups. It says the new minimum age ensures consistency around the world, bringing the UK in line with countries such as the US and Australia. The government says its new Online Safety Act puts more pressure on companies to protect children from harm.
Iran is being warned not to widen the conflict in the Middle East by attacking Israel. Tehran has vowed to punish Israel for a strike earlier this month that destroyed its consulate building in Syria. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron used to call with his Iranian counterpart to press for a de-escalation in tensions. Our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bashega reports from Jerusalem.
American officials are warning that an Iranian response is a matter of when, not if. Iran could be planning to launch an attack on Israel itself and not through its proxies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has been striking Israel almost every day since the start of the war in Gaza. This would be a dangerous escalation of long-running tensions between the two countries. The US has vowed to respond if that happens, and the top American general has been sent possible action, but diplomats to avert a wider conflict. The US Secretary of State has urged countries to persuade Iran not to escalate. Iranian Foreign Minister, after calls with his British, German and Australian counterparts, said Iran was not seeking an increase in hostilities. As fears of an attack continue, the US has restricted travel for its embassy staff in Israel.
The General Medical Council has warned that action is needed now to tackle a potential crisis in retaining doctors to work in the NHS. Regulator to a recent survey which suggested that nearly a third of doctors might leave the UK. Here's our health editor Hugh Penny.
Leaders of the medical profession acknowledge that surveys suggesting doctors are thinking of quitting don't necessarily get translated into action, but the General Medical Council says there are causes for concern. Last year, 30% of those who responded to questions online said they were likely to move abroad to practice medicine in the next 12 months. Another GMC survey suggested that while 3% of doctors said they'd taken steps to leave in 2019, this had risen to 15% in 2022. Charlie Massey, the chief executive of the GMC, said this should be ringing alarm bells. The Academy of Medical Royal Colleges said pain conditions, the working environment and low morale were factors in doctors considering their future. The Department of Health and Social Care, covering England, said doctors were hugely valued and the workforce plan would increase training and improve culture.
The Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron is due to hold talks in Brussels with his Spanish counterpart and EU officials about post-Brexit arrangements for Gibraltar. Sticking points in negotiations reportedly include the rules that will govern the territory's border with Spain and the management of its international airport. Two former executives at the Post Office will give evidence to the inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal today. Alan Cook and Adam Crozier were in charge when scores of postmasters were wrongly prosecuted for theft due to a faulty computer system. Our correspondent Sancha Berg reports.
This morning, the public inquiry will hear evidence from Alan Cook, who was managing director of the Post Office between 2006 and 2010. During that time, dozens of sub-postmasters were prosecuted and many imprisoned. They denied wrongdoing, saying the fault was with the Horizon computer system. Alan Cook has said he was unaware of this at the time. The inquiry has been shown a letter from 2009 where he wrote to an MP that Horizon was robust and fit for purpose. The inquiry will also hear from Adam Crozier, who between 2003 and 2010 was chief executive of the Royal Mail Group, parent company of the Post Office.
And bookings will open on Monday for people in England eligible for a free spring COVID booster vaccine. The rollout of jabs is for those aged 75 and older, as well as younger people with weak immune systems.
Alan, thank you very much indeed. 6 minutes past 6. Let's go to the BBC Weather Centre. Good morning to Helen. Good morning, Alan.
Hello, Nick. Good morning. We had 20 degrees yesterday. We may well get a little higher than that today and challenge the warmest day of the year so far. But with it, that southwesterly wind is bringing a lot of cloud. As we start in England and Wales, there's a lot of cloud in the north in particular, and the west and the southwest of both England and Wales may remain rather murky in these areas, but I do expect that the northeast of England will see some sunshine, but the northwest of England along with western fringes in England and Wales may just have the odd spot of drizzle and some hill fog as well. But for most, the sun comes out after perhaps a grey morning, and we'll see those temperatures rise at 16 to 19 widely, but locally 20 to 21 in the southeast of England and East Anglia. That would make it the warmest day of the year so far. Some strong April sunshine, of course, now. Not Ireland. It'll be predominantly cloudy with light rain or drizzle. As the wind starts to strengthen, I think that will turn heavier through the latter part of the afternoon. Lots of hill fog as well. So temperatures around about 13 to 16, a little breezier as I say than yesterday. And for Scotland too, we have got that cloud and that rain around, particularly across the south this morning, but there'll be some early sunshine further north, and it should last in the north and east of the Grampians throughout the day. Temperatures here perhaps 17 or 18, but for the majority the cloud will thicken, the wind strengthens, gales in the northwest by the end of the day, and heavier rain again across western Scotland, where it's been particularly wet already this week. Temperatures around 13 to 14 here.
Helen, thank you. 8 minutes past 6 is the time. Let's have our first look at the papers. The Times reporting that teachers, MPs and campaigners have accused the technology company Meta of taking a highly irresponsible approach to child safety after it lowered the minimum age for its WhatsApp from 16 to 13. A member of the Commons Education Select Committee described the decision in the Times as reckless. The paper says that it concerns that the messaging app is fostering cyberbullying, sleep deprivation, and the spread of harmful content among children.
Comments by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer feature on 2 front pages. He's told the Eye that he'll increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP if he becomes Prime Minister. He said a more dangerous world made it necessary to spend more on the military. In an article in the Mail, Sir Keir promises what he calls a triple lock on the UK's nuclear weapons, to build at least 4 nuclear submarines in Barrow and Furness, to maintain a continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent, and to deliver all future upgrades needed. In a separate editorial, the paper says defence has historically been Labour's weak spot, but not today. A recent poll showing that the party is now more trusted to keep the country safe than the Tories.
And the Guardian is slightly less bullish about Labour, saying they're at risk of losing a number of their target seats at the next general election because, the Guardian says, Muslims and progressive voters are turning away from the party, angered, among other things, by its stance on Gaza. The paper says polls currently suggest Labour is on track to win by a landslide, but if the margins narrow, some insiders, they say, fear that the desertion of some parts of the party's core vote could prove the difference between a hung parliament and an outright majority.
The Financial Times says Rishi Sunak's hopes of going into the election on the back of lower taxes and cheaper mortgages have suffered a blow because of higher than expected inflation in the United States. Financial markets now expect the Bank of England to cut interest rates just twice this year, rather than 6 times as they'd anticipated in January. The paper says that pushing up the cost of government borrowing potentially reduces the Chancellor's scope for pre-election tax cuts in the autumn.
On its front page, the Express highlights what it calls the triple lock pension injustice for millions. Writing in the paper, the former Minister Baroness Altman explains that fewer than a third of pensioners have received the full 8.5% increase in their retirement income this week. That's because, she says, men aged 73 and over and women older than 71 are on the old basic state pension and will receive a smaller rise, leaving them £200 a year worse off.
The Telegraph reports that the Royal Mail has accused the Border Force of failing to prevent counterfeit stamps being brought into Britain from China. An executive said the government should put pressure on law enforcement to stop the fakes coming into the country.
Finally, a number of front pages feature O.J. Simpson, the football star, who died almost 30 years after he was cleared of murdering his former wife and her friend. The Mirror says he was infamous. The Sun calls him disgraced.
Time now, 11 minutes past 6.
The United States expects that there will be an attack by Iran on Israel, but not one big enough to draw the United States into the war. That is what the Reuters news agency is reporting this morning. Let's talk to Hugo Chego, our correspondent in Jerusalem. Is that, Hugo, so far as we can know it, the thinking of the Israeli government as well?
Well, I think the Israelis are expecting an attack, and I think, they are obviously in coordination with the Americans, and a senior American official, a top general, is here in Israel having meetings with Israeli officials, because they believe, and they've been saying it publicly, that an Iranian attack is a matter of when, not if. Now, the Americans are saying that they will respond if Iran launches an attack on Israel. The Israelis are saying that they will retaliate if they come under attack. It's very interesting that this report that you mentioned, they say that this Iranian reaction will be limited to try to avoid an escalation. So perhaps the American and Israeli warnings are working. So there have been these warnings, but there has also been a lot of diplomatic activity. There have been phone calls with the Iranian foreign minister. There have been public warnings. The U.S. Secretary of State yesterday, urging countries to try to persuade Iran not to escalate. But I think the message is that this attack is likely to happen, and it will happen in the next few days.
And likely to happen because the Iranians say they have to attack because their consulate was attacked in Damascus and some senior people killed.
Yeah, it was a humiliating attack for Iran. It hit an Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus. Two top generals were killed, so they need to be seen as giving a response. And I think the warning here is that Iran is planning to do it itself, instead of using one of their proxies in the region, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has been attacking Israel almost every day. And I guess this retaliation needs to be big enough for them to say, look, this is our response. So, and there has been, the concern here is that this attack could hit, Israel and or even an Israeli embassy. So again, and this would obviously be a major escalation in these, in the long-running tensions between Israel and Iran, and the fear is that this could lead, obviously, to a wider conflict in the Middle East.
Hugo Chego, back here.
It's now 13 minutes past 6. The Post Office inquiry will hear from two more of the bosses of the company, which continue to prosecute postmasters and postmistresses long after they knew that the Horizon computer accounting system was flawed. Francis Reid is our correspondent who is following this. We always hear the name Paula Venables, but there are other people who led this company we're going to hear from some.
There are indeed, and today it's the turn of the soft-spoken former chairman of Royal Mail, Adam Crozier. So he was in charge between 2003 and 2010. Of course, he later went on to take the top jobs at ITV and BT Group. He didn't feature in the drama, of course, but he earned £9.7 million in pay and bonuses during his time at Royal Mail. Now, Royal Mail owned the post office, but it had a separate board which Mr Crozier was not part of, and that's really been key in Adam Crozier so far seeming to have kept involvement with this relatively at arm's length. Will he argue he was just too far up the food chain to know any of this, and that the responsibility lies with the post office board? Well, that argument is very likely to be tested today. Previously, Mr Crozier said he did not have any involvement with the Horizon IT system during his time at Royal Mail, so he kind of gently deflected any blame. But during this inquiry, we've heard that sub-postmasters did indeed write to him about Horizon. Did he get those letters? If not, why not? That could be a key question at the inquiry today. Because, of course, at the heart of this are questions about accountability. Where does the buck stop? Adam Crozier was right at the top, albeit Mail, and today is a key.
The school Easter holidays rapidly coming to a close. Barry, let's might have one or two people just rushing out for a last final hurrah of a weekend away. How are the roads looking?
Well, looking pretty good at the moment, Ben. Just having a look at the cameras and speed sensors across the county. Bit of congestion just on the N25 around junction 28 at the A12, where those roadworks are. And we had all those problems with the traffic lights at the Brook Street roundabout yesterday. Looking at the cameras there at the moment, looks busy on the motorway. The roundabout itself actually doesn't look too bad from what I can see. The lights certainly seem to be working properly from what I can see. Already had an update from Wendy from Felsted, who says there are problems on the...
It is 60 minutes past 6. Can predicting the path of the UK economy be done better? It's something a former head of the Central Bank of the United States has been taking a look at. He's going to publish findings today. Will Bain has more on that.
Morning, Justin. Morning, Nick. Yeah, this was a review done by the former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, a two-time Federal Reserve Chairman, in fact, on how the Bank of England should reform its economic forecasting in the wake, of course, of some criticism that the bank has faced, for example, in terms of its forecasts around the recent surge in inflation. The review, according to the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, is a once-in-a-generation reform for the bank. So I asked Michael Saunders from Oxford Economics, a former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, what he expected from the publication of these.
So I think there are really three issues which the review is likely to address. The first is how the economy responds to major price shocks. We've seen in the last few years big increases in energy prices and food prices, and the bank's models had assumed that that wouldn't feed through to stronger wage growth in any significant way, and of course we now know that those second round effects have been substantial. Second issue is how the bank constructs its forecasts. At the moment they do them based on the market path through interest rates. I think it's far more likely they'll shift to using the MPC's own forecast for interest rates. They would produce a more coherent forecast. And the third issue is how they deal with uncertainty. The Bank of England so far have used these fan charts which show a wide range of possible outcomes around their central forecast. And frankly, fan charts are so wide as to be almost useless. And I think it's more likely they'll shift to using scenarios. For example, pay growth were to be stronger, or if the economy were to be weaker, then to give an indication of how inflation and interest rates might respond in those different circumstances.
And so, Michael, just explain to us kind of how fan charts work, what they sort of do and don't tell us.
So at the moment, the Bank of England publish a central forecast. You can imagine a central line, and then around that, shaded areas which get increasingly wide the further forward you get, to try to illustrate the likely range of outcomes. But those fan charts are so wide, they say that the economy really might do anything in the next few years. I think it's more useful to think about scenarios around the central forecast.
The other concern, and we've seen this a tiny bit in the United States as well, is it sort of politicises people on the Monetary Policy Committee. Newspapers want to know who plotted what. Does it put increased politicisation, I suppose, on the individuals on the Monetary Policy Committee?
No, I don't think it does. I think the press will always be interested in who's voting which way and who's got which view. The votes of individual policy members are published after each meeting, and so people know how each member votes anyway. Now, look, if the press want to make that into like a football match or something, who's on this side and who's on that side, that's your fault. MPC members will make their decisions and give their views, and it's reasonable for them to disclose as to what their views are.
From what you know of what we expect to be in the proposals, is there an instance in the bank's history that you can think of where you would go, actually, if we had this, we wouldn't have made that mistake, or we'd have done this better if we had these Bernanke reforms then?
Well, let's see as to what he says. But it's certainly possible to think back over the last few years and think, well, could we have done things differently? Could we have raised interest rates a bit faster, been more alert to second-round effects, and presented our forecasts differently to the public? And the aim of this review is not in a sense of trying to blame people, but just in the spirit of trying to learn from experience. Let's see as to whether we can do things better in the future.
Do you have any nervousness of what, in the short to perhaps medium term, this might mean in terms of the quality of the work that the bank's putting in?
No, I think that all central banks, indeed all businesses, tend to operate in the spirit of trying to think as to how they can do things better. Other central banks do these reviews as a regular process. I think that should be something which is also turned into a regular thing in the UK.
Right, that we should sort of bake in further reviews every X number of years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's right. The New Zealand Central Bank, for example, does an expert-led external review every 5 years as a matter of course. And that's led to very useful recommendations, many of which have been taken up by the policy board. And that kind of constant learning, I would have thought that's the way in which many firms operate. The Bank of England should be doing the same.
Michael Saunders there, former member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. We're listening to that Fiona St-Cottrell, senior market analyst at City Index and our markets analyst today. Morning, Fiona.
Good morning.
Increased investment in IT, deploying AI and moving away from those fan charts that Michael Saunders tried to explain for us there. Do those all sound like sensible things in this review?
Yes, I think this could be definitely a help towards the Bank of England. I mean, at the end of the day, the more accurate the forecasts are, that really does boost then the credibility of the central bank. And, the economy is constantly changing and structurally it's changing. So, to be able to review on an ongoing basis, or at least, on a regular basis, I think would be a very good idea.
Been kind of story of the week again, hasn't it? Interest rates, when, if cuts might happen. We talked yesterday on the programme about that surprise uptick in US inflation, perhaps kicking a decision there down the road. And we saw the European Central Bank, the ECB, stand firm on its interest rate yesterday as well. What do you think it taught us about what might happen here?
Yes, that's right. So, there has been sort of a slight pushback on rate cut expectations, but still, we do have inflation, which is trending lower. It's down around 3.4% at the moment. And the growth in the UK, it is weak. There's nothing really very strong about the growth situation here at all. So, we are heading towards a cut. That first cut's probably coming towards the end of the summer rather than perhaps the beginning of the summer that might have been expected previously.
Right, so you think a delay, actually?
Yeah, I think there is a potential for a slight delay. We've had Megan Green talk this week about sort of, persistent inflation potentially being more of a problem in the UK than in the US. Now, she is a known hawk, so there is that taken into account. But, we do still have the UK labour market is relatively strong. We've seen service sector inflation is still a little bit stickier than what the Bank of England would like to see. But consumer price inflation is expected to cool towards that 2% level. So, there's still a lot of data to come before June, but I think if I was going to have to place my bets now, I'd probably say it won't be in June, but the meeting after.
And some of that data coming a little bit later on this morning, Fiona, as well, in the form of GDP, the growth figures.
Yes. That's correct. We've got GDP data. It's the monthly report, and that's expected to show that the UK economy grew 0.1% in February, month on month. That's just down very slightly from 0.2% in January. That's still a marked improvement from the recession that we tipped into at the end of last year, which was when we saw negative growth. So, there is a positive to take out of it, that potentially the recession in the UK was short-lived, or will be short-lived at the end of 2023. But still, growth here is very, very stagnant, and
turn to a story that has impact implications around Scotland. This Financial Conduct Authority issued a warning to the former staff Income Fund, which collapsed in 2019. Matthew Noonan, partner at Gibson Dunn, the former head of wholesale enforcement at the Financial Conduct Authority, is with us. Matthew, morning.
Good morning.
Just worth reminding people of what went on at Woodford.
So in 2019, the fund had to be suspended because a series of withdrawals from the fund meant that the fund ran out of money, effectively liquid funds, in order to pay redemptions from investors. That had the impact that those who got out before the suspension of the fund got their money in good order, but those who were left in at the time of the suspension were unable to retrieve their money, with the result that those investors lost a very significant amount of money when the fund was eventually wound up.
of exact financial conduct used pretty strong language yesterday in terms of their sort of findings against Mr. Woodford.
Absolutely. Whenever you get a high-profile here, it has a real impact on the confidence of the financial services industry and people have invested their money, and it calls on the FCA to take action in strong terms.
And in terms of strong language, Mr. Woodford pretty clear through his lawyers saying the findings of the SEC were unprecedented and fundamentally misconceived. He also said he'd be challenging the findings. I think he has grounds to challenge them.
Well, it's important to note that there was also a final notice against the authorised corporate director, so the Link Fund Services, at the same time. So they have accepted the findings against them, but it is also important to note that he is at the start of the process. He has been warned that the FCA intends to take action against him. He has a long opportunity to challenge that of his own case. He and his lawyers clearly think that he has a good point to make, otherwise they wouldn't be challenging it in strong terms.
Yeah, and all of this is about learning lessons, isn't it, from the FCA side of things at a time where we've heard the London Stock Exchange themselves on the programme before talking about this. People are trying to encourage people to have more confidence, ordinary citizens to have more confidence in investing in the stock market. I guess what the FCA is saying that examples like this one could be a serious deterrent to people doing it.
That's absolutely right. And also, you can see the FCA a bit frustrated here. They've done thematic work in this sector both in 2012 and in 2014. So this is not a sudden shock that the sector has been perfectly well behaved beforehand. You can see why they're frustrated and feeling the need to go out hard, because there's an element here of saying that this area of the market is just not getting the quality of controls that are needed to give safety and confidence to investors.
Matthew, thanks so much for your time. Matthew Newman, their partner with Gibson Dunn, former head of wholesale enforcement at the Financial Conduct Authority. Fiona still with us, Fiona Cincotta of City Index. Quick one that we talked about, Sean was chatting about earlier in the week. Fiona, AstraZeneca, we finally had that decision on Pascal Soriot, the boss's pay, and it was a pretty bruising one from shareholders.
Yeah, so I mean there was a bit of a shareholder rebellion to some respect. Around 35% rejected the new remuneration, and that was an increase in pay packet by 1.8 million. So you know these are big numbers that we're seeing. It takes it to around 18.7 million, but he did get approved, and you know there are some comments by some shareholders that actually he could be underpaid compared to
Fiona, thanks so much for your time. Fiona Cincotta there, Senior Market Analyst at City Index.
Well, thank you. 28 minutes past 6, talking being underpaid. Here is Gary with the sports.
That's true. Morning to you. A great round of golf from England's Danny Willett. It's left him 3 shots behind the first round leader Bryson DeChambeau at the Masters. Details on the way after we've heard from Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp, whose team were involved in an amazing result. They were beaten 3-0 at home by Atalanta in the quarterfinals of the Europa League.
We played a bad game. We deserved to lose, and we must feel that now. But it was exactly this night to feel bad about it, and then we have to build up again for the Crystal Palace game. So that's how it is. Congratulations, Atalanta. Really well done. That's it.
The return leg is next Thursday. West Ham were beaten 2-0 by Bayer Leverkusen in the Europa Conference. Aston Villa defeated Lille 2-1. Bryson DeChambeau leads the Masters by a stroke. England's Danny Willett is 3 off the lead, with Tyrrell Hatton 4 behind. Ian Carter reports from Augusta.
DeChambeau tops the leaderboard, but the odds shorten on a second Scotty Scheffler green jacket. The 2022 champion was bogey-free in an effortless-looking 66 that took him to within a stroke of the early pace setter. Rory McIlroy looked on in admiration, while he could only card a 1-71. Arguably the score of the day, though, was Danny Willett's 68, his first round since shoulder surgery 6 months ago. Of those still to complete their first rounds, Nicolai Højgaard at 5 under is best placed. He resumes on the 16th.
It's the Grand National tomorrow, but let's preview today's race card at Aintree with our commentator John Hunt.
There are 4 more top-level Grade 1 races on day 2 of the Grand National meeting. Nicky Henderson, who enjoyed a welcome big race victory with Sergino yesterday, saddles Jongbon in the Melling Chase against last year's winner Pic D'Orhy and Cheltenham scorer Protectorat. Rachel Blackmore, who will attempt to win a second Grand National tomorrow aboard Minella Indo, has some excellent rides today, including Envoy Allen in the Melling Chase and Life in the Park in the Topham Chase, the only race staged over the Grand National fences today. Amongst her 24 rivals is Shake 'em Up Harry Redknapp's Cheltenham Festival winner.
Our selections for Aintree today at 2:20, number 6, Catterick, 4:05, number 9, Can Do Kid. In an hour, I'll be chatting to a Grand National jockey who wrote to the Today programme to ask, why do we never tip his horses?
Look forward to that. Thanks, Gary.
It's the fastest fortune ever made.
Discover the man behind a mass fraud.
And it's the quickest fortune lost.
The human stories behind the data.
When you look at the numbers on a graph, imagine if they could help you. The guilt of a serial killer.
And the facts behind the fads.
Fitness trackers are actually better at recording data when the wearer is sedentary, which is not exactly very helpful in a fitness tracker.
Podcasts to feed your curiosity. Good Bad Billionaire, Uncharted with Hannah Fry, and Sliced Bread. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Time now is 29 minutes to 7. You're listening to Today on BBC. Before Nick Robinson, Justin Webb and Alan Smith with a summary of the news.
Children's charities have criticised Meta, the parent company of the messaging app WhatsApp, for lowering the minimum age for users in the UK from 16 to 13. A BBC investigation has found that children as young as 10 are being added to WhatsApp groups that contain sexual images via...
The 856 has lane blocked westbound at the Cricket Village interchange.
interline with other countries, and all users have options to control who can add them to groups. Iran is being warned not to mount an attack against Israel as fears grow that the conflict in the Middle East could widen. Tehran has vowed to punish Israel for a strike earlier this month that destroyed its consulate building in Syria. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, told his Iranian counterpart to press for a de-escalation in tensions. The General Medical Council has warned that action is needed now to tackle a potential crisis in retaining doctors to work in the NHS. The regulator was responding to a survey suggesting that nearly a third of doctors might leave the UK. The government says doctors are hugely valued and its workforce plan would improve culture. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has said his party's commitment to nuclear weapons is absolute and will form the bedrock of its defence strategy. He's pledged to build 4 new Dreadnought submarines in the UK if he becomes Prime Minister, as well as maintain the continuous at-sea deterrent and deliver all future upgrades the nuclear programme needs. The National Farmers Union is warning that climate change is causing extreme weather that will undermine food production in the UK unless farmers are given more support. The government has announced details of grants to cover losses incurred by farmers in England as a result of heavy rain this winter, but the NFU says there are major issues with the funding. And the former managing director of the Post Office and former chief executive of the Royal Mail Group will appear before the inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal today. Alan Cook and Adam Crozier were in charge when scores of postmasters were wrongly convicted due to a faulty computer system.
Thank you. It is 27 minutes to 7. A big piece of signalling in the political world this morning. Keir Starmer, Britain's nuclear weapons and indeed our wider defence budget. He is the subject of an exclusive in not only the I newspaper but also the Daily Mail. I was talking to Nick earlier, political crime spotter. What do you make of what he's saying?
Total, unshakable and absolute, Justin. That's how Keir Starmer is describing Labour's commitment to the UK's nuclear weapons this morning. I mean, look, it's pretty clear and a signal to voters that he wants to win over those who think that a powerful military is an important part of UK life. And what's really interesting to me is he's not just saying that Labour will renew nuclear weapons, something that the last manifesto, actually, the 2019 manifesto, committed to. He's making it clear that this is a long-term commitment. It's a generational commitment, as he writes in the Mail this morning. So there's 3 things that Keir Starmer is saying he will do this morning. Firstly, build 4 new in Furness. Secondly, maintain the continuous at-sea deterrent. And thirdly, that most important part, I think, is delivering all upgrades in future that's the part that may well cause the row with some of the Labour Party here, which is that he's saying we will keep this going for decades, that it's a generational commitment.
Yeah, and you can see a kind of fight back, can't you, on the front page of The Guardian, where they're saying, well, you might not exactly lose seats in big cities, but not do as well as they're expected to in big cities because of the loss of what The Guardian calls the progressive vote.
Yes, and you know, I think that's something that Labour HQ is thinking a lot about this morning. Speaking to senior people in the Labour Party, they are clearly a bit nervous that some of these issues will alienate some of their kind of core vote. But quite clearly, this is a strategic decision by Sir Keir Starmer to say, look, it's the centre that I think I need to win over. You know, it's not just saying the world's an unstable place at the moment, so we need to keep these weapons at the moment and see what happens. He's trying to frame it this morning as something that's absolutely integral to the Labour Party, and there's a really interesting part of his op-ed in the Mail where he says that it's a towering achievement of the Labour Party's history in line with the NHS, talking about the commitment of Clement Attlee to nuclear weapons back in the 40s and 50s. So he's absolutely trying to make this a bedrock of what Labour offers in the electorate.
Just briefly, when you mention an op-ed in the Mail, that in itself is eye-catching, isn't it? And I challenged Wes Streeting about writing in The Sun the other day, and he absolutely doubled down on me. He said, why not? We've got to reach these people and people who read these newspapers. And that is plainly, isn't it, as you say, very much their strategy.
I'm certain you're going to see a lot more of it as well as Labour tries to sort of expand its reach into parts of England that would perhaps normally be seen as more blue. It will absolutely be aiming for papers like the Mail and the Sun in the next few months. It is worth just briefly saying, Justin, very briefly, that the commitments that Labour are making are pretty similar to the ones the government's making this morning, but that in itself is part of the story, isn't it?
Thank you.
It's now 23 minutes to 7. Nearly a third of doctors say they might leave the UK, a finding that's led the General Medical Council to warn that action is needed to improve working conditions. Let's talk to our health editor, Hugh Pym. Morning to you, Hugh. What are the GMC saying needs to happen?
Well, Nick, the GMC, the General Medical Council, do acknowledge that surveys are one thing, and you can ask people, like doctors, for example, do they intend to do something?